I can start this meeting off for Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Governing Board with the roll call from the clerk.
Jenny Breckus. Here. Naomi Dewar.
Here.
Bonnie Weber. Marsha Burkbigler. Here. Charlene Bybee.
Here.
Devin Reese. Donald Abbott.
Here.
Ed Lawson. Von Hartung.
Present.
Jean Harmon.
Here.
And non-voting member Katie Simon Holland.
Awesome. Thank you. And if we could pledge to the flag, and if I could have Jeremy lead us in the pledge. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks, Jeremy. On to approval of the agenda. To have a motion to approve. Any changes?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Hartung, second by Ms. Dewar. All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? Passes
Has joined the conference.
passes unanimously. Approval of the minutes for June 13th. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Bybee. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. And then for the meeting on August 8th for the RPGB, a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second, anyone?
Second.
Awesome. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Awesome. Thanks, Bonnie, and welcome. Public comment. Do we have a few?
Yes, I have one for this item, and I'm sorry, I can't read your first name. I don't want to butcher it, but Ms. Brown.
Is there a button?
It should be unmuted. Oh, there you go.
Hello, my name is Nancy Brown. Thank you very much for having me here. And I'm very excited about the regional plan and the work that the Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Authority has done on this to get it ready. And specifically the housing element and the enterprise work that's been incorporated it too. And I am very much in support of that and hope you vote in favor. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Nancy. Anything else?
I have no more for this item.
Awesome. And we'll close public comment. Go to consent agenda. Motion to approve, or anyone want to pull an item?
So moved.
A second? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Thanks, Bonnie. 7A, RPG. 7A, RPGV Resolution 19-04, resolution of appreciation for the service of Marsha Burkbigler as chair of the RPGB 2018 to 2019. I think Jeremy will handle this one.
Be my pleasure to read this into the record, Marcia. So Regional Planning Governing Board Resolution 1904, appreciation for the service of Marsha Burkbigler, 2018 to 2019 chair of the Regional Planning Governing Board. Whereas Marsha Burkbigler served as the chair of the Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Governing Board from August 2018 through August 2019 and provided extraordinary leadership during the final months of the 2019 Regional Plan Update, encouraging collaboration among the jurisdictions and affected entities. And whereas Marsha Burkbigler imparted thoughtful, focused, and visionary leadership to the Regional Planning Governing Board, the Regional Planning Commission, and the Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Agency during this time. And whereas Marsha Burkbigler oversaw and facilitated multiple meetings focused on the 2019 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan Update, including 2 RPGB retreats, 1 RPGB and RPC joint meeting, and each of the regular RPGB meetings, including an update item. And whereas Marsha Burkbigler guided the creation of each foundational component of the draft 2019 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan, including the guiding principles, scenario planning, community engagement, and soliciting input from all members of the RPGB and RPC. And whereas Marsha Burkbigler supported and guided the involvement of the RPGB and TMRPA in the Truckee Meadows Regional Strategy for Housing Affordability in partnership with Truckee Meadows Healthy Communities and Enterprise Community Partners. And whereas Marsha Burkbigler, during her tenure as chair, sought to engage the board members collaboratively on important regional issues, including the aforementioned 2019 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan Update and the Regional Strategy for Housing Affordability. And whereas Marsha Burkbigler engaged and guided detailed discussions of the overall direction of TMRPA and supported TMRPA staff throughout her tenure as chair, thank you. And whereas Marcia Burke-Bigler sought to provide an efficient structure and inclusive environment for all voices to be heard during meetings. And whereas Marcia Burke-Bigler brought her own style in referring to the executive director, previous executive director Kim, during governing board meetings, including but not limited to Madam Manager, Madam President, and of course, Madam Executive Director. And whereas Marcia Burke-Bigler brought her sense of humor and patient, engaging style to the meetings, and this one's definitely from Kim, this next line. Whereas Marcia Burke-Bigler has a love-hate relationship with potatoes and loves a good shoe. And whereas Marcia Burke-Bigler consistently and effectively exercised her responsibilities as a member of the RPGB efficiently, fairly, and with strong leadership, clear direction, respect for staff, and a commitment to the benefits of regional planning, now therefore be it resolved that the Regional Planning Governing Board does hereby extend its sincere appreciation to Marcia Burke-Bigler for serving as a member of the Regional Planning Governing Board and for her countless hours of public service on behalf of the citizens of the Truckee Meadows. Thank you.
Thank you all very much, and the word is out that I now love shoes, and so I think it was probably already out. I'm sure that Ms. Simon down there already knew that story about my shoes, but at any rate, thank you very much. It was an honor and a pleasure to serve on this board and to serve as your chairman, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it and how great it's been to really get to know all of you so much better through our efforts on behalf of Truckee Meadows. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, thank you. Thanks for your service, Marcia. Yeah, big shoes to fill now, right? No, come on.
Size 7, size 7, just, that's all.
Cute shoes. No taken. I have cute shoes to fill. We'll move on to 7B, RPGB Resolution 19-05, Resolution of Appreciation for the service of Kimberly Robinson as Executive Director of the Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Agency. And Okay, note taken. So I'll take this one. Whereas Kimberly H. Robinson served as the Executive Director of Regional Planning from December 2012 to August 2019, and whereas Kimberly H. Robinson served as Interim Director of Regional Planning from December 2011 to December 2012, and whereas Kimberly H. Robinson also contributed to the region by serving as Planning Manager at Washoe County prior to her roles at TMRPA, and whereas during her tenure as Executive Director of Regional Planning, Ms. Robinson provided effective and compelling leadership and direction for the program of regional planning and provided the highest level of technical and administrative expertise to the Regional Planning Commission, the RPC, and Regional Planning Governing Board, RPGB. And whereas Kimberly H. Robinson comprehensively promoted close working relationships between the Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Agency, local governments, affected entities, and other agencies. And whereas Kimberly H. Robinson directed the coordination and management of a variety of complex planning projects, programs, studies, analysis, and education presentations utilizing innovative,
Yes.
Innovative and best planning practices to address regional land use, form and pattern, national resource management, infrastructure provision, and implementation of regional planning policies to address the unique needs of the Truckee Meadows region. And whereas Kimberly H. Robinson preferred the British pronunciation of the word innovative.
It'll work.
Close. And whereas Kimberly H. Robinson provided critical and detailed analysis and recommendations to the RPC and the RPGB during numerous public meetings regarding the 2019 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan Update, and whereas Kimberly H. Robinson was instrumental in the coordination of stakeholders and acquisition of funding to complete the regional strategy for housing affordability, and whereas Kimberly H. Robinson directed the creation of a regional data warehouse and analytics to promote data-driven decisions making for our region, and whereas Kimberly H. Robinson led her staff and the agency with transparent decision-making, profound integrity, diligence, conscientiousness, that word. I went to Sparks High School, give me a break. And thoughtfulness, providing staff with opportunities for growth through considerate and supportive management, And whereas Ms. Robinson fostered a creative and inclusive atmosphere in the agency office through the use of humor, snacks, and a cast of interesting animal hand puppets. And whereas Kimberly H. Robinson has consistently carried out her varied responsibilities with a focused and thoughtful approach, and in a spirit of cooperation has worked to serve the public, her colleagues, and the RPC and the RPGB for the betterment of the region. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Regional Planning Governing Board expresses its utmost gratitude to Kimberly H. Robinson for that conscientiousness, that word again, service, and wishes her the absolute best in all her future personal and professional pursuits. Adopted this day, October 10th, by the affirmative vote in the Regional Planning Governing Board. So thank you, Kim. She's not here, but nice catch. Perfect. We will move on to the meat and potatoes, to 7D, informational presentation and discussion. Oh, I screwed that one up. Discussion and possible action to adopt the update to the 2019 Comprehensive Truckee Meadows Regional Plan as recommended by the Regional Planning Commission as set forth in the RPGB resolution. I'll pass it on over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jeremy Smith, for the record, Interim Director at Regional Planning. We have a pretty short presentation to sort of talk about the regional plan update and the new draft. I have the clicker. Okay, so some of you may have seen this graph before, but it really kind of describes the foundational pieces that have led us to this moment now where we have a draft plan, a new draft regional plan. Started back in 2013 with the completion of the industrial land needs analysis. That was a project that we worked on. We were talking about it here in this room. It helped build technical capacity with how we looked at land use, specifically industrial land, and the infrastructure and facilities that were connected to that land, and sort of we were able to rank lands in terms of their shovel readiness for industrial. We followed that up with a housing study that looked at 2 unique scenarios of how this community could grow in the future, and we assessed fiscal impacts in terms of capital infrastructure improvements that would need to be built to support those 2 different patterns. We found that if we grew a little bit more centralized in the McCarran Ring, we could save over 20 years around $780 million. So those efforts and other technical efforts really helped to support the work that led to the regional plan. Further, we participated in some foundational work, specifically Portland State University's Urban Sustainability Accelerator Program. That was a year-long program where we had access to experts in planning, folks that had been elected officials in Portland, Oregon, and Metro and Sacramento area. Some folks from this board actually participated in some of those activities, as did staff from the local local jurisdiction planning staff. We got a couple of reports out of that. One was a look nationwide at regional planning, and we found that we were a little bit unique in this region. Also, we had a workshop about transit-oriented development led by G.B. Harrington, and that was held here in town. So those are some examples of some of those building blocks in the blue on the bottom that led to the stuff in the gray there, the scenario planning and the policy evaluation and development. That really kicked off in June of basically 2017 when we were funded to move forward and go ahead and hire consultants and start really work in earnest. But we were working towards this plan even before we had that. Many of you were here, obviously, for the scenario planning work that we did. We looked at 4 patterns. We used the 2 housing study patterns and added 2 more patterns, smart greenfield and infill. And we measured 14 different impacts. You know, the whole point was to look at if we grow one way versus another, what are the differential impacts in traffic, wastewater generation, student generation, land consumption, metrics like this that our community would feel if we made a certain set of decisions. And the idea is to get out in front of that and understand what those impacts could be. That led into the plan draft as well, and that's in chapter 2 of the draft. You can read that in detail. A ton of work, though, was in that box in gray on the right, policy evaluation and development. We basically went policy by policy through the existing regional plan, over 140 goals and policies in that plan, to figure out, and we did this in conjunction with our consultants from Echo Northwest, with the folks sitting here at this dais, with the RPC, with the Regional Plan Update Working Group. I see a lot of faces out there that participated in that, and that was planning staff from the 3 jurisdictions of Reno, Sparks, and Washoe County, as well as the RTC, the Western Regional Water Commission, and the school district. We hammered out through the policies, meeting weekly or bi-weekly for 2-hour meetings every Thursday to figure out where we were going to take, how we were going to take this thing forward. And we were able to get from that 140 down to 60 policies. And we basically, you may remember some of those graphs, they look like spaghetti, or they're called Sankey diagrams. We have a policy crosswalk, and so we know all of the policies that have been removed, coalesced, combined, or even expanded in this new plan. It was a great effort, and we wouldn't be where we are today if we didn't have the help and the consensus of all the parties that have been trying to push towards that draft plan. All along the way, we've tried to engage everyone we could to get involved in this regional plan update. We've held well over 50 presentations and community meetings across the community, NABs and CABs. We've gone to coffee shops. We've gone to all sorts of places to get the word out about the update. We did even more than this, but we did 7 MetroQuest surveys online where we had approaching 4,000 respondents covering subjects such as regional concerns, seniors, trails, quality of life, the scenarios. That was very successful. We hosted 11 what we called food for thought lunches or lunch and learns, where we provided lunch and folks could come to the RTC office and hear what we had to say and participate. We did 2 large community conversations at the Discovery Museum in the Collaboratory Room, which has a kind of a cool room, and those were fairly well attended. The first one had about probably 85. The most recent was less than that, but we had a lot of great feedback at those meetings, and we were able to do some little exercises and get input. As I mentioned, we've been obviously working with the Regional Planning Commission and the Regional Planning Governing Board throughout. We've had over 30 meetings with you folks, whether it's a public meeting forum like this or a one-on-one with staff at, in a conference room somewhere or whatever happens to be. And then that Regional Plan Update Working Group, we met at least 50 times. It felt like 100, but it was great. Okay, so we got through that draft, and let's talk about some of the key overall changes. First off, if you've used the old plan, you'll notice that the new plan has pictures in it, right, and graphics. It's much more approachable. It's more of a narrative style and maybe less of a technical document than the previous one, trying to engage folks that haven't been involved before. We've included data analytics, that, building off the scenario work, but also driving towards a data-driven annual report, which will really help us contextualize the decision-making going forward. We're going to be tracking and monitoring our decision-making, as well as things like absorption, land consumption, wastewater generation, and the like, similar to what we did with the scenarios. And I mentioned that we cleaned up policies. We went from 142 down to 60, and the idea was to eliminate redundancies, to eliminate confusion, to take things out that were already prescripted in other places that were a higher authority, like the state law, from what we were trying to say in our policies, and to focus on making the plan more implementable at a regional level, trying to be regional with the plan, and let master planning at the local jurisdiction level proceed, and will really be a regional review. So that was a thought process as well. But maybe most importantly was a re-embedding into the Nevada revised statutes that dictate what the contents of the regional plan need to be. And that is NRS 278.0274. And it's actually much longer than these 5 bullets, but it covers these major topics. Population projections. We need to do a projection of future population and the things that are going to be needed to serve that population. Regional form. We need to be focused on limiting premature expansion of our development pattern, trying to promote infill at the same time recognizing that we need to preserve the character of existing neighborhoods. There needs to be efficient public facility and service provision that works in lockstep with the master planning process. We need to try to conserve our natural resources, identify areas that should be protected, and of course, we act as a facilitator and coordinator across government entities and agencies and the public to bring everyone together and keep everyone in the loop. So those are the 5 areas that we really keyed in on for the contents of this plan, for those 60 policies. And so we had 5 actual elements, if you will, of the regional plan. The first is population growth. Here we've taken our work we were doing with the consensus forecast, which is our attempt to do an unbiased forecast of the future of next 20 years of population and employment growth. We put that right into the plan. We put some policies in to address spatial disaggregation. That's how we spread that population out onto the landscape. That's something that we need to continue to work on, and we're committed to work with our jurisdictional and affected entity partners to make sure we do the best job we can with that. And we also addressed affordable housing. Specifically, the strategy for regional housing affordability that Nancy Brown talked about earlier is mentioned in the policy, but that we should have in our master plans at the local jurisdictions policies to address housing affordability. Then moving on to probably a chunkier section, a chunkier element is regional form. This is the RF section. Here's where we identified a new concept called regional land designations, or as we've been referring to as tiering within the TMSA. I'm going to show you a map of that in a sec. We talk about what it takes to move between tiers, and we also address some components of the rural area outside the TMSA. So what is the TMSA? Here we have a map. Looks pretty blue up there. But you can see that there is a black boundary on the edge. It's kind of this shape that goes to the north and south, and there's an east, kind of northeast to west component. That's the Truckee Meadows services area. That's the area within which you could expect to have municipal services delivered in a 20-year time frame. Well, this was established several plan cycles ago, and through our technical work, we have recognized that it is actually quite big. It has more capacity inside of that boundary, even based on existing entitlements, existing zoning today, than we need for probably the next 40 years. It's probably double. So what we set about doing, and this came from the Portland State program to some degree, but also from our own discussions, was to seek to have some way to control how that built out. Since we have a greater than 20-year capacity, and the plan is a 20-year plan, how can we help to control where we want to see density, intensity, where we want to see investment? So we came up with this idea of tiering. The mixed-use core is the first tier. That's the very dark blue in the center. That corresponds to our mixed-use areas as identified in the master plans of the City of Reno and City of Sparks. That's the area we would want to see the greatest density and intensity of development. We've actually set minimum thresholds for development, something like 14 dwelling units per acre in terms of residential development and a 0.25 floor area ratio. Moving out from that area, we have the Tier 1 area. That is pretty much the McCarran Ring, and then the tendrils that go north and south correspond to suburban corridors as identified in the Reimagine Reno plan. These are areas where we do also want to see investment, but we recognize that there's a range of uses. So basically the intensity is from an existing standpoint up to basically unlimited if it's possible to serve, because that's coming. Then we're moving to Tier 2. Tier 2 is kind of a suburban density. It's inclusive of the incorporated boundaries of the cities in this case, and it allows for up to 30 dwelling units per acre sort of as a maximum density in that area. Finally, inside the TMSA, we have something called Tier 3. Tier 3 was our attempt to really identify those lands that either are maybe in the unincorporated Washoe County area, they are in the spheres of influence of the cities, they aren't currently served by infrastructure, they're sagebrush, or they have very low density zoning or master plan land use at that time, to set them kind of in stasis in their existing density status and give really this board the ultimate decision-making power on when to unlock those through a regional plan amendment. So it allows those areas to act in some ways as a reserve for future use. Okay, outside of that, outside the TMSA, we have the rural area. This is the least dense portion of our area of authority. It goes from outside the TMSA all the way up to the Oregon border, does not include tribal lands, does not include the Tahoe hydrographic basin, but everything else. And in that area, the sort of maximum density that you can achieve is 1 unit per 5 acres. So that's how the tiers break down. And the idea is really in support of where we want to see density and intensity of investment, but also where we have public facilities and services. So the next element that we can talk about is that element, the PF element. We've actually been able to move from a system of concurrency management, which was a little bit opaque, if you will, in terms of how master plan land use entitlements would be served by facilities, to a list of standards for 5 regional services where we say, can you show us this? Is this possible? For water, is the existing capacity available and adequate to serve the development? If not, is it planned for in a 10-year time frame? If not, will it be put onto the developer to pay for those improvements? And even if those things are not met, for example, then we've worked with staff to develop a feasibility analysis component, kind of like a relief, where you could say, okay, what capacity is necessary? How would it be funded? and how would it impact other plans? So we're really trying to build towards a better understanding of where we have public facility capacities and service capacities, and what we need to do to enhance those services and facilities to support the growth that we're planning for. Yeah, I'll talk about the idea of a public infrastructure investment plan in a second, but that's to really build on that. What else? Natural resources, next element. That is something we actually expanded in the plan. We went through and coalesced and condensed policies, but in the natural resources section, we actually expanded because we realized that we're facing sustainability issues in this region, climate change, just a host of uses that could impact our natural resource. And one of the things that makes this place so great is our access to the natural resources, to our natural environment, right? We can go right up and go hiking right outside of town. So we want to make sure that we're working to protect that. And finally, regional coordination element talks about things like the spheres of influence, programs of annexation, how we're going to review projects, and it talks about the Truckee Meadows annual report, which I mentioned. So moving forward, as a work plan, once we get this plan adopted, we're going to do a few things. One of them is that Truckee Meadows annual report. And that's going to be about tracking, compiling, presenting back to everyone that's involved, the absorption rates, the number of master plan land use decisions, creating a dashboard that we can look at, and hosting an annual event where that is unveiled. The natural resources plan is another initiative that we're looking to use to strengthen our natural resource element. In the NRS, it does indicate that we need to develop a map that identifies sensitive areas for natural resource protection. Currently, we have a map of strict development constraints. That's a little bit different. There are other squishy areas that we need to invest time in figuring out where those are. There's been a lot of time already invested in that work, and so we're not looking to reinvent the wheel. We're looking to centralize information and work with partners that have already been doing this to create and bolster that element. And finally, the PIP, the Public Infrastructure Investment Plan. We realize that we've gotten as far with that list of standards I talked about for 5 regional service provisions, and I didn't mention that's water, wastewater, flood, schools, and roads. Those are the 5 pieces that we've got in our standards table on page 90 of the plan. But we know that we have a level of information today, and it can be better. And so once again, we're going to try our best to collect all the information that's out there, work with our partners to bring together one centralized version of this public infrastructure information so that we can use it as a context to make decisions, right? We don't want to make decisions blindly. We want to know how our decisions are going to impact what we've already planned to do. So those are items that we're seeking to move forward with post-adoption. At this point, I'd like to kind of talk through the timeline of how we got here a little bit. It's been a very long process, as I mentioned. We started in June, but in this year, 2019, we released a first version of our policy elements I just described back in February. We went through some round and round with staff, trying to build for consensus, and we were shooting for a June adoption date. We didn't quite get there. On April 25th, we had a meeting of the Regional Planning Governing Board. You guys were there. We were over at the Sparks PD. And the motion was really get this thing finalized. We want to see a full draft of this plan 2 weeks prior to a meeting in August of the RPGB. So we worked through what we called polarizing issues at the time. Worked with staff, right? We identified some stuff is great. We all agree. Other stuff is a little tougher, to crack. But we got really far, and so on June 27th, we were able to get to a second version of those policies. After we had that second version, we met with regional planning commissioners individually. We unveiled how we had worked through that, and then by July 25th, we actually had the first full draft of the regional plan, and we provided that to staff at the local jurisdictions for review. So moving on, we did a little bit more review, and we got a third version of the policies in between handing out that July 25th draft and getting to that August 8th meeting of the Regional Planning Governing Board. It was here. And that's when we handed the plan to you guys for the first time for your review here on the board. We also held individual meetings with RPGB members. I'm sure you remember because you were there. And we talked about any sort of issues that you might have with the plan at that time. Moving on, after that, we got to an August 27th draft. We wanted to get that out in advance of all of our public engagement. We had like 11 or 12 meetings planned within the month of September, and so we wanted to have as clean of a copy as we could. At that point, all policy language had been finalized. We basically had finalized in version 3, but we had a few edits from the Regional Transportation Commission to make sure that we acknowledge the fact that they do provide services outside of the TMSA, like there's a bus to Carson City, right? And so we just cleaned up that language a little bit, and then we got that draft out on the web. Over the course of September, we attended each of the local jurisdictions planning commissions and gave a presentation. We hosted, I think, 3 lunch and learns. We had a September 11th Regional Planning Commission meeting. We hosted that community conversation at the Discovery Museum on September 18th. And after all of that work there, and any comments we received, and anything we found that was an error, we got to the draft that's actually in the packet today, the September 23rd draft. And so just to kind of discuss, what edits did we make in that time? So since that August 27th, we did little things. It wasn't substantive. We adjusted the staff list to make sure we had the right people acknowledged. We hyperlinked the table of contents so you could move through the plan quickly and sort of address, how do you use this plan? We did some edits based on discussions with the Reno Sparks Indian Colony. We did not have authority in tribal lands, and so they were concerned that some of our maps weren't displaying that, so we got that on there. Also, Washoe County Health District, moving on. Ozone Advance is something that they're working on. Our region's very close to non-attainment in terms of ozone. So we've been working with Daniel Inouye and the Washoe County Health District all along to address that, trying to limit with our tiering, right, the expansion, and keep VMT down. But we also acknowledged right in the draft that the Washoe County Health District is participating in the Ozone Advance program. It's a cool program that will help keep us in attainment. Worked on some definitions, some grammatical edits, and finalized some of the graphics. And I've got to tell you that right now, on the record, last night at about 9:30 or 9:15, we discovered a clerical error in the plan, and it is on page 219 of your packet. It's page 115 of the plan. And so during our discussions with staff and with elected and appointed officials, it was determined that the Reno-Stead Joint Corridor Plan could sunset. It's a joint plan between Washoe County and the City of Reno for an area up in Stead. We removed the map. We actually don't even have a map showing any joint plan or cooperative planning areas right now because there are none per that. And we put a blurb in saying we would create a map, but we failed to remove 2 lines on that page, which is page 115 of the plan against 219 of the packet. This is totally an error on our part. Made a mistake, yeah. So it's a clerical error. It's not substantive. That's not supposed to be in there. I just wanted to acknowledge that. Thank you.
Yeah,
Good.
I got it. This,
Those 2 lines. Do you want me? I can read them if you'd like.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
So, Mr. Smith, or Dr. Smith rather, forgive me, and I say that genuinely, would the motion need to include the striking of those 2 lines in order to adopt the plan? Okay.
Yes.
That's all.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on from that, we make mistakes, but we fix them. We're humans, yeah, exactly. So that brings us to that December 23rd draft, and yes, you have another question?
Okay,
Sorry.
give me a page number again, and
Oh,
can
sure.
you refer to the 2 lines for the benefit of the audience who is sitting there without
Absolutely
the
will.
possible plan in front of them? Thank you.
In the packet, it's page 219. In the regional plan draft, it is page 115. And the 2 lines are in policy RC3. And they read, they're at the bottom of the policy, they read, the following area has been designated a joint planning area and is depicted on map 5. Number 1, the Reno-Stead corridor, a joint planning area of Reno and Washoe County. So that really should not be there because we took map 5 out and we acknowledge in the blurb right below there that we don't have any joint plan or cooperative planning areas, and that if we do, as this body or whoever, staff, if we create that, then we'll put a map back in here.
And then if I could just hop on 223 or 119 of the packet, we have a blank page that says it's intentionally left blank to accommodate a potential future version of said map 5. So trying to plan for that as well if we were to do that later.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome.
Good call. Yeah. Does that satisfy? Is that good? You're very welcome. Okay, so we took this September 23rd draft, mistake and all, to the 3 meetings of the Regional Planning Commission to hear public testimony physically in each of the 3 jurisdictions that participate in the plan. So on the 25th, we had a meeting in this room, so that counts for the city of Reno, because we're actually in the city of Reno proper. The next night, we went to the city of Sparks, and the following night, we were at the Marvin Piccolo School down on Foothill in the unincorporated area of Washoe County. The result of those meetings was we heard public testimony, and I'll go ahead and show you some of what we heard during those meetings. Number one, some folks came out concerned about the way the tier mapping was laid out in the North Valleys, specifically around a project known as Silver Hills. We worked with the land developer and Washoe County staff worked with them as well to kind of help them understand how it would not affect, these changes would affect his development. And by the end of it, Bob Listner was the developer. He, I think, felt really good, and he was on our side. Gordon Gossage from Regenesis Reno came out to talk about how he supported the plan and supported the concept of YIMBYism, which is yes in my backyard, and really looking for that infill. There was folks from the Truckee Meadows Bicycle Alliance that came and identified that they'd like to see language that was more specific about safe, connected, and off-road bike paths. And we followed up with those folks, and we're committed to working with them. And we think we can take a look at that in our natural resources and public infrastructure investment plan, and also in conjunction with the regional transportation plan and the bike and ped master plan. It was pointed out to us that there was a small erroneous area in the city of Sparks, so we made that edit to correctly portray the city of Sparks boundary. And then we also received a letter from University of Nevada, Reno, specifically regarding the main station field lab over on McCarran, the UNR Farms. And they were concerned about the impacts of this regional plan on their desires to seek a conservation easement on that property. There were other concerns expressed regarding, if you can see here, flooding and flood management, and using that UNR farm area as a place to do flood management. So I went and talked to UNR staff. We talked about the fact that the valuation of the land matters to them in terms of trying to get the conservation easement. They're willing to work through the process. And I think the cool thing is that the end goal of everyone involved is to preserve that land as a farm, to continue to use it for flood storage, for treated effluent disposal, and for farming, which is great because we don't have a lot of farmland left. Bob Listner came back and gave some more ideas for tiering. There was some folks from, Russ Earl in particular, from the Silver Knolls community group who came to speak out against the Silver Hills development. So there was a bit of an interplay there. Concern regarding infrastructure issues was brought up, the need to plan responsibly and sustainably. I mentioned the UNR Farms flood storage, and then we heard some support from jurisdictional staff. So that was kind of the summary version of the testimony. In the packet, there's minutes you can look at and see. There's actual emails and input that we received from folks on our website.
Oh, yeah.
I think this is the last one. We're just about done, and I will stop talking. I'm sorry.
Are you giving a shout out?
Yeah, I'll have a question as soon as.
Okay, thank you. So back to the timeline that led us here on the 27th, the RPC unanimously voted to adopt a resolution 1906 of the RPC, which approved at their level, the regional plan draft, and to recommend final adoption to this body. So here we are, October 10th, our first chance for possible final adoption. Happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Hartung?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Smith, when you were talking to the residents who were concerned with infrastructure and the lack of infrastructure prior to development, was it their concept or their inference that the municipality should front load all the infrastructure and determine where density and growth should be by spending taxpayer dollars and building that infrastructure prior to any land use changes?
No, it didn't quite come out that way, but it was more concerns, I think, for the impacts that they were feeling and that we should be working to avoid those impacts. Traffic, flood mitigation, that sort of thing.
Okay, was it ever articulated to them that along with a land use designation change, that the infrastructure would be a condition of approval?
Yes, it was indicated to them, and also in terms of this plan, we indicated that that was the step we were trying to move forward with our standards list and the public facilities element, and also our work on that public infrastructure investment plan in an attempt to really, get as much information, see where we have the gaps, understand how to fill them in, and use that context to make the decisions as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Ms. Breckus?
Thank you, Mr. Director Smith, for your presentation. I have a question. One of the fundamental shifts of this plan from the 2 plans ago when it was last comprehensively done is the inclusion of buckets that curb unincorporated growth in keeping with some of the statutory values of premature land and infrastructure provision. And so we move off of that. What's replacing that to ensure that the regional forum is responsible?
Yeah, great question. What replaces that is the tiering system. So the Tier 3 designation acts as a reserve. Further, the linking of the decision-making process to the standards that are listed and the need to prove the ability to serve a given entitlement as well. So the tiering is the main one, though, those land use designations.
Okay, let me, if I could follow up, Mr. Chair, with that. I have a few questions to that point. I wanted that set. By my analysis, about 20% of the page length of the document is related to the scenarios. But at the end of the day, the plan does not recommend one scenario or another. So to that end, if we don't know what scenario we're working under, how do we implement population growth policy 2 related to spatial disaggregation, or does that just default then to the classic scenario because we're not moving off of into a different scenario? So the disaggregation is just what the past is the present is the past, and so on. Thank you.
Good follow-up question. So the scenarios, you're right, we didn't choose a specific scenario, even though we were trying in the beginning to move towards a preferred scenario. What we ended up learning through the process is that we can't necessarily control where these things grow. Existing entitlements outpace our 20-year projection, and so there were a myriad of ways that 20 years could be realized, even if you change nothing going forward from right now today. So instead, we tried to examine the impacts of going one way versus another as a way to understand trade-offs between how we might make a decision. In terms of the spatial disaggregation, to some degree, we deferred the methodology conversation around the disaggregation, but it will be based on the tiering. So there will be allocations to the tiers. It will be done in conjunction with local jurisdictional staff and affected entity staff. And the plan is to bring that methodology forward to the RPC and to this body so that you can examine those assumptions that we will make before we provide that in advance of, one of the main customers of the spatial disaggregation is the Regional Transportation Commission. And so we'll want to get that methodology figured out before we deliver that.
Okay, I'll let someone else have the floor, but it just seems that the acknowledgement and exception of the existing entitlement seems to be the blockage in determining a scenario. Because with those they're scattered out to outlying areas. They don't allow you to adopt one scenario or the other.
Well, they allowed us to reimagine, in some cases, in the smart greenfield scenario, how they could be changed to allow for maybe more density, more protection of open space. The existing entitlements and, to some degree, the mixed-use core and the unlimited density that could occur there has the similar effect in providing that sort of unknown. Okay. So those things working together, yes, did not allow us to create one specific scenario that we wanted to enforce. But I think it's also good that we didn't necessarily do that because, picking the scenario and really trying to enforce a specific land use seems like an overreach. And in this case, we've tried to direct growth and create that tiering system to control the expansion.
Yeah, Ms. Stewart.
Thank you. Talking about the tiers, could we go back to the map where you show the talk about the tier? 1, 2,
Absolutely.
3? Okay, so you've laid out tier 1, what they represent, but what do they mean in a regulatory process? Could you explain that?
Absolutely.
What?
So there's a table. Let's see if I can get to that table there.
Yes. I just want him to go over it in public.
Yep. So on page 194 of the packet and on page 90 of the plan itself, there is a table in policy RF3, which is the regional land designation requirements. And so for the mixed use core, or for any of these tiers, we have a minimum density, a maximum density, and that's residential, both of those, and then a non-residential standard. So in the mixed use core, the darkest blue center area, we have a 14 dwelling unit per acre minimum and no maximum. In the tier 1 land area, our standard, our minimum density there is the existing density. We're not looking to lose density in the McCarran Ring and in those corridors, but there's no maximum. In terms of non-residential standards, in the mixed-use core, we're asking folks to meet a 0.25 FAR. That means you cover at least a quarter of the parcel with some sort of building. And these are relaxed a bit from the previous transit-oriented development corridor standards, which existed in the existing plan.
And maybe I'm trying to go a little higher level.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Not reading this table, but explaining, if you're in tier 1, 2, 3, what does it mean to this board? You know, what does it mean in terms of review?
Oh, great, yeah. So if you're trying to do something that's allowed by this table in the tier you're in, then you're going to operate similar to what we do today. If you're going to change your master planned land use, or if there's a project of regional significance that's identified, it's going to have to work through the local master planning process first, but then it will go to the Regional Planning Commission for a conformance review.
That's if you want to change from it.
That's if you're in the tier, if you're doing what is allowed in the tier, But if you want to change, that is the difference, and that is where we've tried to give the power, the regulatory power, to this body to say, okay, now we want to unlock a tier 3 area, for example, and we want to develop it and put a few thousand units on it. Currently, maybe it's sagebrush. We're going to be taking a look at all of the policies in here, especially with regards to public facilities and services. It will have to go through the local planning process, it'll go to the RPC, and then it will come to this body for the final approval.
Okay. So how did you decide what went into what tier?
It's great question as well. It was a process. It was an iterative process. It began with working from the data that was collected for the scenarios and trying to look at, where we had infrastructure, where we had pipes, water pipes, sewer pipes, roads, that kind of thing. We learned pretty quickly that we knew the locations of things, but we didn't necessarily know the capacity that they could handle, right, going forward. So just being in proximity to a pipe didn't necessarily mean you could utilize it. And so that was kind of an underpinning for why we wanted to go down the public infrastructure investment plan route. Further, we did a lot of work early on, you guys probably remember this, identifying regional concerns. And, wastewater was at the top, flood was up there, school overcrowding came to bear, affordable housing. So we tried to also then iteratively kind of contract some of the boundaries of the initial tier map that we made back in February to account for those concerns. Ultimately, it was, given the information we have at the time, and the folks that were in the room, and the concerns of jurisdictional staff, we worked together to beat out a compromise, if you will.
So where I'm a little bit confused, and I used to live down in south end of Reno, but in the Washoe County area, and sort of near Arrow Creek, but not over there, near Field Creek, but not there either. But anyway, it's called Tier 3. But yet it seems almost fully developed with residential. It's the county. It has water. The water system was combined with Tumwa, but many of the properties have septic tanks, for example. And I was just wondering, it's already developed, but we put it in Tier 3 because how is that different than, let's say, an undeveloped area that might be in Tier 2? That's where I'm struggling a little.
Yeah, so absolutely. Tier 3 also took into account some of the lower density areas in our region, kind of trying to keep it at that existing level, because it was planned for and is largely built to put in something way more dense in those areas could potentially tax the system that was initially planned, right? So we would want to make sure we were looking closely at those impacts. In terms of why an area would go Tier 2, certain areas are, there's certain areas like Sun Valley, for instance, which is in unincorporated Washoe County. It currently has a higher density than most areas in the unincorporated Washoe County area. It has a GID, so General Improvement District, and it's got transit. It's pretty close in. It was an area that we thought could be, we worked with everyone to get on board with this, that would be an area for revitalization. So we didn't want to have the regional plan stand in the way of what could be a great thing out there.
Well, I'll wrap up and just say this. I think I admire the effort to go parcel by parcel, unit by unit across this entire TMSA and try to figure out this tiering. I know in Reno, I was told that they tried to basically put what was annexed into Tier 2. And if it wasn't annexed, it goes in Tier 3. And if it was like downtown, it went into these dark blue colors and so on. But I do think in the effort, some parcels, just as with when we did our master plan, we found that some areas were mismapped.
Yeah.
They ended up in the wrong bucket or box or whatever you call it. And I just wondered if we find that, and I've already identified two that I have concerns about, but I want to wait till we hear from public comment. But what would we do? What would be the process? Could you just talk, maybe it's our attorneys, just talk about if we find that instance, how do we amend that or fix it or address it?
You want me to take a stab at it? Yeah, okay. Well, we would, if it's identified, basically, it will require a regional plan amendment process. And so that will start by one of the local jurisdictions or the RPC or this body saying, we want to do a regional plan amendment to change this map. And then there'll be a bunch of analysis. If there's needs to be maybe a master plan land use change at the city level, let's say, that would have to be approved as well. We want to get in early in the process to make sure that everything that we're requiring is being thought up front, so it's not like we'll get to the end and it's not going to work kind of a thing. But if it's approved through the local jurisdiction, it would go to the RPC, and then it would come here to this body for a final vote.
And our attorney, do you have anything to add?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I may. Just so that the board's clear, you don't have to wait the 5 years to do the mapping change. You can amend this plan. You have the updates every 5 years. You have an annual amendment cycle. And then in the intervening periods of time, you're allowed to amend the plan for the health and welfare of the residents. So if you have an unintended consequence of a map going somewhere it shouldn't, you can make that amendment. And 6 months later, if something comes down the road, you can pick that up. So.
Well, I'll give you just one example so people can think about it. The very, very tippy south of this plan, there's a light blue area, Tier 2, and I'm pretty sure that area is not annexed into the city, otherwise it would be in my ward, because that's where my world is, and it's a huge floodplain, has a fault, has a hot springs. I mean, we already told people that came interested that it just wasn't primed for development. It's an area. And I would think that that's the kind of area you would have put in Tier 3 based on constraints, natural resource issues, and the fact that the jurisdiction already said not ready for prime time. So that might be an example of something I think,
It's a great example, and I think I've been trying to think about the tier map as a start condition for this process, because you're right. We may have made some mistakes on exactly how it was drawn. There were compromises that were made to get us through the process, but we were hopeful that the Natural Resources Plan Initiative and the Public Infrastructure Investment Plan will help us to refine those boundaries. So we could actually do that work.
So we could end up moving them based on those kind of.
I think so,
Okay.
yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Hartong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to dovetail on Ms. Dewar's question, so, Mr. Smith, if a parcel exists today that is not annexed into the city, and let's just say the owner decides to annex into the city, it's Tier 3, does it automatically become Tier 2?
No.
Okay. And, okay, so that's good. The part, and look, I'm fully supportive of this, I'm ready to vote at any time. But the part that I don't understand is out in the Silver Knolls area, when you look at the far upper left portion, you've got areas out there that I know that no infrastructure exists, and yet you can have 30 dwelling units per acre,
Right.
where you've got areas closer in that are only, I don't know, 2.5 dwelling units, 3 dwelling units per acre, maybe even 1. And
So-
they're essentially contiguous. So there's just some places that just because they were annexed, the infrastructure doesn't exist, but yet they've been given a greater consideration when the services are not there and the infrastructure doesn't exist.
Right, same as this space, actually.
Duly noted, and I think, again, that was, that allowed us to get here. And
And again, I'm supportive. It's just, it was a dovetail on Ms. Stewart's question, and I appreciate it. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Dr. Smith.
Can I address one
Yeah,
thing?
go for it.
I just wanted to address one more thing. The 30 dwelling units per acre is a maximum, and just because it's in that light blue color doesn't mean that it would necessarily be allowed for 30 dwelling units per acre. I mean, there's a lot of planning processes that are going to go into this, and we're going to also be focusing on those standards. I mean, at the local level, the master planning that gets done there is not necessarily going to, allow that to happen either. It's more to just kind of stay out of the way and set some threshold at some point for maximum density.
Ms. Bybee?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So talking about the tiers also, as we looked at this, some of the tiering would incorporate entitlement that's already there, so development that we know is already there in all of our either county or city master plan land use maps that are already in existence that we're not going to try to change. Some of those tiers also, whether they're tier 2 or 3, and I'm looking up at the Silver Knolls right now, some of that gives, whether it's county, if it's still unincorporated, or either city, gives them the ability to ask for development, say tier 2 development at those intensities, but they would still they can't just the development can't happen unless the criteria are met in the infrastructure, the PIIP, correct? So looking at this map, that tier 2 could, in some areas, could not happen because the infrastructure, the water, the sewer, whatever it was, you couldn't meet those standards. It just gives the ability for a developer or county or cities to do that, as well as some of that already is developed to those standards. Am I following it right? Is that the?
That's correct, yeah. It gives the ability to ask, but policy PF1 is a list of standards that should be met. So it doesn't guarantee anything.
But those have to be met in order for
Correct.
the development to move through the process and be approved to whatever intensity it is.
I mean, that's
at
our
whatever
approach.
tier.
We ultimately recommend the decision, and underneath that analysis, that we're not the deciders, but yeah, that's what we're pushing, that we would make sure that the standards are met, that we understand that the facilities and services can be provided in order
Well,
to.
and I think at the end of the day, as we've looked at the growing and really looking at the McCarran Loop, looking at infill and intensity, we've come back to the issue that all of us know. I mean, everyone realizes the farther out you go, the more expensive, and the infrastructure is not there. So even for laypersons or the average citizen to know that the roads to go north on 395 to get out there, not only the traffic, but infrastructure is not there. It will be eventually, but for right now, pushing towards infill, towards the biggest limiting factor for all of us are all the infrastructure needs that we have to provide and the cost to do that. So for a developer, it has to make sense for them, and if they have to build that infrastructure, or if the infrastructure is even available, but for us, from roads to sewer to all of that, is really kind of at least my top priority as we look at growth, that we always have to look, that's the top thing we look at, and does it make sense? And because we dial down to resources and quality of life and this planning, I love the tiers. I love, as we're looking at it, it makes sense, and I think I do like the fact that it's a fluid plan, that we're able to, we're not locked into this for 5 years or 10 years, that, like Norm said, if it's 6 months from now, but it's something that that we can look at changing as needed and as as we continue to grow or not grow. It gives us a really good plan moving forward that I think I appreciate all of the work that was done from everybody, not just all of us sitting here, but most of you who did all the work, and all of our planners and all of the community and the Regional Planning Commission that came together with data and analytics that we've never had before. So that's exciting to me, is that we have, I like to have information to make decisions, and I think we have a ton of information to make really good decisions. So I'd like to thank all of you for that.
Thank you.
Jeremy, let me ask you, oh, excuse me,
Go for it,
sorry.
Ms. Dewar.
Just so I really understand this, just using my previous example, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the areas I was talking about, Arrow Creek, Field Creek, Saddlehorn, all those areas, most of which have septic tanks, why would we not say that's a priority infrastructure fix, that we need it, versus the blue where we have undeveloped, unannexed land that has no services, no water, no sewer, has floods? So this is where I'm just struggling. And so we can't fix it today, but what I want to know is that you said we can come back, and, like, I might vote to put my dollars in the county, to get people off septics prior to developing undeveloped areas, fix what we have versus grow in a difficult area. So.
Great call. I would just answer that saying that the idea of the tiering is really about entitling new land. So I think, those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. The idea of, providing infrastructure to, take people off septic, for example, that's already in existence. That's something outside, I think, of even our purview. But in terms of allowing another 1,000 units to go somewhere that isn't ready, those are the decisions that we're trying to make.
Okay.
No,
Oh, Jean, Ms. Herman,
Okay.
sorry.
I always come back to the same things that worry me, and some of the things that we've caused by not planning very well. And so there's some math problems and there's some wet stuff. Okay, so I see the population in 2017 was figured to be about 451,000. So now, 2 years later, with all the growth, we must be close to 5, I would say.
I believe it's around 461, 464.
Is that just 10,000, that's it? Because, our limit with our resources, our water, right now is right about in the 560 area, 561, I think. So we've got a lot of work to do, and we've got to hold our feet to the fire and make sure we're not making any more mistakes. And that's my major worry, because Lemon Valley is not a good situation, and we haven't figured out how to fix that yet, really. So that's my warning. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Ms. Breckus?
Yeah, I just want to kind of circle back to a thought that came up before when I was questioning. That is, we didn't go with one of the scenarios. We didn't find it right to saddle ourselves in on that. To me, that's what the plan vision should be. You should identify a vision. Ms. Bybee said, I like it's a fluid plan, and the attorney said we can amend it. The 5-year time frame is not that long for a plan life. And to me, there's so many policies in here that contemplate ways to amend the plan while you're doing it, and that is problematic, and probably one of the highest flaws I see in the plan document. But then there's 2 others that are closely related, and that is there seems to be a big punt to doing the PIP, the infrastructure plan, and doing the natural resources plan, but it says that both of those have to be done by 24. Well, that's the next cycle. So, that's problematic to me. The work of deciding some Mrs. Dewar's concerns of, what's in the tier here and why, you kind of said, Mr. Smith, is, the compromises we had to make to get through the process. I think this is when you go in there and and look and get to that. And so I'm struggling with that, but I want to, when a plan is in form and document is when I start to think of scenarios. And I've been on Tumwa now for about 4 or 5 years, and Reno approved Snowgate. And Tumwa, time and time again, says we are not going to use water to manage growth. We are going to respond to what is done at the local government and the regional plan. So, but now under this PIP, you're saying you got to get it out there. And I think that it's putting the regional infrastructure providers in a place that they're not. It's a circular logic. And I have a problem with that, and I want to ask you how you can respond to one, that work program you're putting forward, and also the fact that I don't think that the regional providers, they're still in the mode of responding to the growth.
Thank you for those comments and questions. So with regards to the NR plan and the PIP being done by 2024, we just wanted to absolutely make sure that they wouldn't go beyond that and that they would be available to inform the next 5-year plan update. But in fact, we've already started on both to some degree, even more so on the NR plan side, I guess I would argue. But we're working with TM Trails. We've talked with KTMB, One Truckee River, the Washoe County Planning Open Space Plan people, you know, the planners over there. We're not looking to drag it out. We're looking to, get these things started up instantly. The work we did on the housing study was my first deep dive into infrastructure, talking about Tumwa, talked with those folks about their planning process, the public works folks at the 3 different jurisdictions, the school district, and the RTC. And it's not so much about asking them to serve areas as it is asking them to provide us the information about what they have planned for. What capacities do we have right now? What can those capacities, what areas can they serve? If we're planning to do something, what time frame? What capacity will it provide? So an example could be something like the Sierra Reflections development down in south end of the TMSA there in Pleasant Valley. My understanding, which is pretty limited at this point, but would be that one of the reasons that it's an active tentative map for about 1,000 units, one of the reasons it hasn't gone forward is there's no sewer. And so we're not saying go put sewer out there so it will go forward. We want to know, is there a plan to put sewer out there? If so, when? How big will that be and what kind of capacity will that create? Does that match up with potentially master plan land use decision making around that area if something were to come in near it? So it's not the emphasis of the PIP, I don't think, to direct where the things go. It's to contextualize the decision-making so we understand what we've already planned for, what we already have capacity to do, and optimize that. And in terms of moving in the right direction, we've gone again from that concurrency management standard where it's kind of a trust us standard. Don't worry about it. We'll make sure that there is infrastructure there at time of building permit. We want to go further, and we want to say we should be contemplating what is the public facility plan that needs to be done when we make the master plan land use decision. So that's why we've put the standards in. If it's not available and adequate, if it's not planned for in a 10-year time frame, or if it's not going to be put onto the developer, and you can't prove the feasibility, that would be a condition for recommendation of denial.
Mr. Chair, I have one more.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for the indulgence of the group. I've spent a lot of time in the flooding issues, and at the public workshops, my understanding is, I wasn't there, but my understanding is the UNR farm came up in terms of what tier it's in. And I always think of UNR farm as one big thing. And but apparently part of it's in the Spark sphere and part of it's in the Reno sphere. And in the Spark sphere, they put their part of UNR farm in tier 3. And in Reno, even though it's not annexed, again, one of these outlier things, we put UNR farm in tier 2. And through further conversation, I know, and maybe you'll tell us a little bit about this after the comments or whatever, I know that there's been dialogue with the university. They're trying to get a conservation easement. They advocated that they thought staying where they were would help them get this conservation easement. I want more than anything for UNR farm to get a conservation easement. They've been talking about it since 2005, to me specifically. saying, this is our plan, and we're almost 15 years past that, and there's still no conservation easement. So when we get to that, after public comment, I would like to make a recommendation on that. I just want to put a marker right here, right now, that I really think Sparks did something good in doing this and recommending this. I admire you guys for doing that. I will say, I had a feeling you would say that. He would say, would you repeat that? Sparks did something great, in my opinion.
Oh, we got better.
And recognizing that this is a very sensitive area and it's a very deeply flooding area, and they put it in Tier 3. So I'm almost mystified how it ended up in this city sphere, Reno city sphere, in Tier 2. I think that's weird to have it in 2 different tiers. I have heard from you, who you explained that they thought this would help get them a conservation easement. They wanted Sparks to change their Tier 3 to Tier 2, right? There was a letter from UNR saying that would be a good idea. And my concern is that I think uniformly, currently, a UNR here, we'd like to see that conservation easement, but I also know we're not all going to be here forever. And I know the Board of Regents is going to change, and I know the president will change, and the people that run the farm will change. And so my concern is just on timing. If a conservation easement doesn't appear, I think that we should be taking steps to kind of unify this unannexed land. It's not annexed by Sparks, not annexed by Reno, and put it all into Tier 3 at some point. I wanted to put this as a mark because this is such an important issue to me that it would, despite the phenomenal work being done, it would almost make me vote against this plan because it's such a sensitive issue. We've spent about $150 million of public money, Reno money, Sparks money, county money, 1/8 cent flood money, and federal money. And I could list the projects for you: $50 million of land, $30 million of restoration, $20 million on a bridge. I could go on. We've invested so much in terms of public infrastructure investment to then say it would be okay that this is Tier 2 land, more ready for development than Tier 3 land. It just really strikes a discordant note for me. And so I just wanted to put that as a marker. I have a potential fix for, I'm willing, once we hear again from public comment, if we're going to move forward, I have a potential fix where I'd like to allow them time to work on their conservation easement, but if they don't get it done, that we really need to address this and put it in Tier 3 if that's a more perceived as more protective against development, if that's how it's perceived. And I don't know, that's why I asked you the question of what does Tier 3 mean? But those are just some of my concerns and thoughts, and I wanted to get them out there. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Then Ms. Charlton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pretty much ready here to hear public comment, but I wanted to make sure that, and I know we all know this, that when we talk about infrastructure and we say, okay, sewer infrastructure doesn't exist. If the developer is willing to build a treatment plant, then it exists.
Yep.
That happened in Cold Springs. The developer built the Cold Springs plant as part of the conditions of approval because there was no sewer capacity there. So I think we get out over our skis where we forget that as a condition of approval, before the first house can reach C of O, that piece of infrastructure has to exist in some form. And we all know that most often we don't necessarily pay for those kinds of things to happen. Sometimes we do front load them, and the new ratepayers will pay back plus the interest, and that certainly occurs. I mean, we see that we've seen that in the South Truckee Meadows with respect to some of the increases that Washoe County has borne in order to serve all of its customers, regardless of whether they're in the unincorporated area or the incorporated area of Reno. So we have front loaded some of those things, but that will be borne by those ratepayers. So to think that we're giving some entitlement and it can just go out and be built and they're just going to pop up like daisies in a field after a spring rain, that's just not so. Those are always conditions of approval, including water, wastewater, transit, and transportation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Yeah, Ms. Breckus.
I think this, the developer's pay is and so they can do it is problematic in two ways. Is one, I think there's often hidden subsidies and costs to some of this sprawling development and regional form that maybe aren't recognized. If you are building out to where they can build their sewer treatment plant, but involves on a VMT, and those are in the data part, a VMT that is going to put air quality attainment over the edge because it's much more auto-dominated, then there is a cost, and it's probably not the best regional form. Or if it's going to put stretch sheriff deputy responses where they're already stretched to move it out, then it's probably, comes with issues. I think if the development pays for this or that, not to mention the life cycle costs of maintaining some of these, I think it's outdated thinking. That's why I keep going back to the prescription of the scenario we land on, and we didn't. But the question specifically is early on in 2014, an amendment to the Evans Ranch PUD, which is up above off Lemon Drive up there, approved maybe 2006, 2007, came before this body, or came before the city council. I opposed it, came to this body, continued to oppose it, and this PUD has never gone to tentative map, but it had a realignment now through some BLM land and other things. And I had conversations that when we do the new plan, we should amend our projects of regional significance resolution to respond to amendments to projects of regional significance when they modify, other than just the 10%, because this amendment basically put an arterial, which is going to be costly, through a neighborhood. In unincorporated Washoe County. I don't see that in there. I don't see either amendments to the resolution suggested or certainly incorporated into the document from the whole experience we went through on the Wild Creek school site. So that's issue number one. The other one is the lands bill. I find the language of the lands bill problematic, in that, one, a lands bill should be identified in this plan or not done, or elaborated upon that if anyone wants a lands bill, take care of it at your home jurisdiction, show where you want it, and bring it here. Because I'm going to tell you, if I see on my calendar in the next 3 months or 4 months a joint meeting of all the jurisdictions to talk about a lands bill again, and then we have to come back, not in this setting, but in another setting, it's just a lot of time for me. The activists call, our federal delegation gets involved and everything. So those are some changes that I think the lands bill concept should have been taken bigger ownership in this plan. So do you have any comment on the projects of regional significance, why that resolution is amended, and why we're not more specific on the lands bill concept?
Sure. On the lands bill side, we weren't involved in any of the discussions previously, as a staff level at any rate, on the lands bill, although we tried to get involved. And this policy is an attempt to make sure that the master plans of the local jurisdictions acknowledge that we should be involved in the lands bill. My second comment would be, for the lands bill, even if lands are, say, an area is identified and these lands are put into the hands of the local governments for disposal, they'll still have to follow the standards and the tier-to-tier movement, what is required to move into the TMSA or to go from tier 3 to tier 2. There's still going to be, there'll be lands. They'll come out of our development constraints area if they're no longer public lands, but they'll have to follow the process.
Yeah, Ms. Burke, go ahead.
Thank you. The other thing about lands bills nationally is the land doesn't go to the local government. It stays in the hands of whatever the entity is who holds it currently until all it does is it changes the ability to sell it. So to dispose of it in some manner. And the disposal may be to open space. It may be to national park. It could go to any number of different things. It doesn't necessarily mean disposal to buildings or building houses. But I think the most important thing to remember is that all lands bills, the land does not come to the county or the cities. It stays with the government entity that holds it. And it will stay there until it is acquired. And I see my colleague down there who's been working on it more than I have, but that's the way they work nationally, and it wouldn't be any different in the greater Washoe County.
Unless it's identified, Commissioner, for municipal use, like, let's say,
Correct.
Golden Eagle Park.
Yes, it can be identified. That's the only way that it would immediately be transferred to a government. Or it could go immediately to an Indian nation, for instance. It can go government to government as a direct transfer, but then the government can't sell it for private money. It is then locked in, and it must stay as government property, either as open space or whatever. So I mean, I think we need to worry less about the land spill, because technically, as Jeremy indicated, if the lands bill goes through, it's going to have to comply with the language in here anyway.
I get that. I just procedurally, I'm saying if Southwest residents above Collin Ranch see a, 10-foot by 100-foot strip of BLM land and they want it disposed of, that's the lands bill. Please bring that. I think the process should be me bringing that to the City of Reno Council, identifying it, and then coming through the regional plan sponsorship to this body as a regional plan. That's the way it should go on, rather than someone among the managers asking to assemble all of us for a meeting and this and that and this and that. I think we should tie ourselves to having it start at our home jurisdiction, what we want, and then move it through this process. Because otherwise, we're just spinning our wheels again and again, and it's been happening for like 15 years.
Ms. Burke-Bigler?
That's not the way land bills work at Congress. A neighborhood cannot go to Congress and say, I want this strip of land up here. I mean, they can do that, but generally to get BLM land, it's about a 12-year process. The purpose of the lands bill is to bring it down into a shorter time frame within which the land could be then designated. And so if it's included in the lands bill and the neighbors in Collin Ranch say, look, we'd like to have this strip up here designated as an open space, a permanent open space, a fire break, or whatever that they want up there, that's the way to do it, is to get it previously designated into a land bill, because then you can get it done in a very short period of time.
But what we've had is Mark Amadei come to our dais at the City Council and say, I don't want to have any lands bill discussions, so don't go back to DC and talk to me about lands bill unless all three jurisdictions are agreeing. And what I'm saying is use this planning process as the city bringing forward the fire break above Collin, showing what it is, sponsoring the plan amendment, everyone agreeing upon it at the governing board, passing resolutions then back home, and that's the lands bill process. Because these meetings and these requests, I mean, I've met with your own legislative lobbyist in meetings one-on-ones. That was a waste of my time. And so let's do it through this process. Let's set up some ground rules in this plan for that. Thank you.
Mr. Lawson?
I will guarantee you, Jenny, we're not going to have a joint meeting. It's going to come to Reno, it's going to come to Sparks, it's going to come to Washoe County. You're going to pass your resolution and do what you need to do, and then we're going to go as a group on the lands bill. But I fear we're way off subject here. So I would like to entertain a motion if we could.
Public comment.
All right, public comment.
And
we'll-
Ms. Weber, do you have anything? Are you still around? Okay.
Yes, I am.
Do you have anything to say, Bonnie? Are you good?
Other than I appreciated hearing out the comments, and I look forward to hearing the public comment, and then ready to vote.
Awesome. Thank you. I will open it up for public comment then.
Yeah. All right, first up I have Moira Howenstein, and then after that we Kim Rodemeyer.
Can you hear me?
Not really.
Yeah, try it now.
Hello?
Yep.
Sorry about that delay. For the record, Moira Howenstein, Division Director for Washoe County Planning and Building. I wanted to recognize the effort that staff from all three jurisdictions has put into this. Also, thank you for your efforts and our leadership. Thank you so much for the last 2 years. A special thank you to Norm. Thank you for spending some time with us to clarify the authority through NRS that Regional operates under. That was very helpful. And also Jeremy, thank you so much for bringing lots and lots of data to a knife fight, which, there were no knives, but there were a lot of misunderstandings and a lot of baggage that came through just inheritance from our jurisdictions. And, And we found resolution and peace through data, and this criteria-based plan in front of you is the basis for it. So I hope that this board recognizes the importance of that and how it does dissolve jurisdictional boundaries and agendas. It's not perfect, but we have another chance in 5 years to tweak it again. I feel like there's an urgency, though, to change how we are doing planning and how we are growing in the region together. And I wanted to say that this is truly a regional plan, and I hope that the board can value this enough to support the regional plan, how it stands in front of you today, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Kim Rodemeyer, and then after that will be Bob Webb.
Is this on? Hi. Kim Rodemeyer. Mr. Smith acknowledged that when they make mistakes that they like to correct them, and I would like to inform you guys that you've made a couple of mistakes. Number one, I'm here to try and advocate for UNR farms to be entirely in Tier 3. The city of Reno has already, or is in the process of eliminating all of Steamboat Creek flood storage by allowing Daybreak to be built in southeast Reno and on the Butler Ranch North, and that totally eliminates all of the flood storage that was available for Steamboat Creek flooding. I'd like to also say to you, the UNR conservation easement, I went back and looked at the November 2018, UNR held a special meeting of the Board of Regents. In that meeting, the minutes indicate that there was much discussion on what a conservation easement would mean. Apparently, they can decide what they want to do in their conservation easement. They can decide that they want to sell it for development. It's just that when they transfer that and they sell it and they transfer that conservation easement, the ability to sell it off for development would go with it. And then they also, in their 762 acres, they decided that the value of the water rights was really important to them. They brought it up multiple times. And I have also heard Mark Johnson state on the record in public that he is going to monetize the assets of the university. And that means if he wants to sell the land, they're going to sell the land. So conservation easement. I'd look into it if I was you, because according to the minutes of their meeting, they had a bunch of different ideas of what a conservation easement means. We need UNR farms for a viable flood project. If there is no flood storage, then there's no flood project. We're already in the middle of getting rid of all of the Steamboat Creek flood storage with the Daybreak project. UNR, that 762 acres is all that's left. And if that's not protected, then the flood project is moot. It's, why have one? Because there's no place to store the water when it backs up from the Narrows. So it's critically important to have at least some flood storage. And you guys, this is going to be on you, because if you guys allow them to develop it and get rid of the flood storage, then everything that we've done over the last 20 years is gone. It's just out the window. And $150 million, Ms. Dewar said. So I'm urging you to please put the UNR farms in Tier 3 to protect it for the safety of the entire region. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim.
Next up, I have Bob Webb, and then after that will be Amy Cummings.
Good afternoon, I'm Bob Webb. I was one of the Washoe County representatives on the Regional Plan Update Working Group, and I'm pleased to state for the public record that Washoe County staff fully endorses and supports the policies as written in the draft regional plan that you're contemplating this afternoon, actually, the September 23rd version with the slight amendment that Director Smith pointed out. That endorsement and support also includes the tier concept and the tiers as expressed in Map 2, the regional form map. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, I have Amy Cummings, and then after that will be Chad Giesinger.
Thank you. Amy Cummings with the Regional Transportation Commission of Washoe County. And I want to thank you for facilitating a very robust community engagement process and agency coordination process throughout the life of this plan. I think that's led to great results. Also for inviting RTC staff to participate on the working group. That meant a lot to us to be able to join in those discussions with our partner agencies. We also want to thank you for initiating use of MetroQuest. I think that was the first effort that was used here in our community, and we've seen it used successfully in many other scenarios since then. And at RTC, we look forward to implementing the plan through our upcoming Regional Transportation Plan update. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.
I have Chad Kiesinger, and after that will be Sharon Zadra.
Good afternoon, Governing Board members, Chair Abbott. I'm Chad Giesinger, Planning Manager for Washoe County Planning and Development, and also a longstanding member of the Regional Planning Update Working Group. I'm very pleased to be before you today. This has been a very long road to unconditionally offer support for this plan. Sure, there's lots of things that could be changed in this plan. There's lots of things I personally may have done different, but I think we really came together and worked hard as a group, worked through a lot of very complicated issues. And I think going forward, that will serve the region well because your staff will have a much better understanding and a better foundation to implement the vision that this truly groundbreaking plan represents. I also want to point out that this board has the opportunity today to adopt a plan that for the first time, and I've been involved in 2 significant updates and 1 minor update. So since 2002, I've been involved in this process. You have the opportunity today to approve a plan that for the first time will not increase the size of the urban footprint or the TMSA. All other updates have had dramatic increases in that area. And secondly, it's my sincere hope that this plan will not end in a lawsuit. And I think that we are hopefully on a path to where you can adopt this plan today and there won't be a lawsuit. But more importantly, I think you have the opportunity today to adopt a plan that will serve the citizens of this community well. And it'll provide some guidance to the citizens of the community and some reassurance that we're all working together and that we have the best interests of the citizens in mind. And so with that, I thank you and urge you to adopt the plan as written. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Sharon Zadra, then after that is Sarah Chavilicek.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Sharon Zadra, Executive Director, Truckee Meadows Healthy Communities. Absolutely, I'm here to say congratulations. This is an onerous task, and you all have done, I think, a tremendous job having sat in your seat and as a participant of the community. I think I can bring that 360 focus, an incredible amount of work, treacherous at times, but you should be commended. This is your opportunity to think with the big vision, which you don't always have. Again, I respect the time and the input that you have all had. In particular, I want to thank you for 2.5 years ago when the process was initiated for including affordable housing as a priority within the plan. And the regional strategy that we have brought before you as this board previously and to each of your own governing entities is the work of the community, dozens and dozens of public meetings, just like you, Jeremy, had with yours. At least 5 dozen people met every month, sometimes twice a month, on these issues. So great work, and it's the first step for us being able to take on some of the most ornery and demanding needs in our community. Thanks for your work.
Thank you, Sharon.
Next up, I have Sarah Chavilicek, and after that will be Jim Smitherman.
Good afternoon, Chair Abbott and members of the board. For the record, I am Sarah Chavilicek. I'm here to urge the board to approve adoption of the 2019 regional plan. I feel it is very, very important that you fully understand that when the Regional Planning Commission met after many, many, many meetings, after lots of community input, and as many of you know, I am a strong advocate for community input and for community voice. And the Regional Planning Commission voted unanimously to support recommending adoption to you for adoption of this plan. During the last jurisdictional hearing of the Regional Planning Commission, a regional planning commissioner asked staff of each of the jurisdictions if they supported the adoption of the 2019 regional plan update to include the policies and the mapping and everything included within, and without exception, each representative responded affirmatively. I want to go on the record too, as I appreciate the work that the members of the governing board have put into this project, as well as equally appreciating the work of the Regional Planning Commission members of the countless, I can't even remember how many meetings, but lots of them. And they were very deliberative and very collaborative and very, very informative. And most of all, I thank the staff wholeheartedly for all of your efforts, all of the jurisdictional staff and the regional planning staff. Without them, we wouldn't have the collaborative effort that is put forth here. This plan takes us forward. It is transparent, it is informative, and it is collaborative, and most importantly, it engages community voice. I urge your adoption. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Next up, I have Jim Smitherman, and then after that will be Armando Ornelas.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Jim Smitherman. I'm staff for the Western Regional Water Commission and the Northern Nevada Water Planning Commission. I also participated on the working group. I thought that was a very thoughtful and inclusive process, and I think it turned out a good plan, a very solid plan. I appreciate the fact that the plan is based on a lot of good data and that it has sound projections into the future. I look forward to seeing staff working on the PIP in conjunction with the Northern Nevada Water Planning Commission as it reviews its regional water plan over the next year or so, and then coming up with a product I think that will improve both plans. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim.
Next, I have Armando Ornelas.
Chairman Abbott and members of the Regional Planning Governing Board, I'm Armando Ornelas. I'm the Assistant Community Services Director for the City of Sparks. City of Sparks staff does endorse the draft plan. In particular, we view tiering, or more precisely, the prioritized hierarchy for development as a big step forward. In our experience in Sparks over the last several years, while we have not seen as much overall development and construction as we saw prior to the recession, we have certainly seen more in our mixed-use core. We see the tiering and the prioritization of development and more specifically the investment priorities that reflects as critical to continuing that revitalization, redevelopment, and infill that we've seen in the last few years. So we look forward to working with our colleagues both at the other jurisdictions and with the affected entities on the PIP. Hopefully, the PIP that comes out of this process will allow us to continue building on the success that we've had here. That concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Armando.
I have no more public comment for this item.
Perfect. We'll close public comment. Is there any other questions, comments? Ms. Stewart?
Yeah, thank you. Before we get to the motion, I too am, we've heard a lot of positive comments through this working group, and I too am so impressed with the amount of work gone in. Like anything, this is never done. That's why there's constant 5-year update and even more frequent update. I wrote the state water plan with my team, the state natural resource plan. None of those were a fixed thing. We just kind of arrived at a point and we made recommendations and we knew that it would change over time. I am hoping, I already went on record about my concerns about the flood areas. I'm hoping that once this motion passes, which I think it will, especially in regard to the excellent and detailed work that the staff did and everyone did, I'm hope you'll consider a motion to address UNR Farm. I want to be able to vote for this. I love it. I think it's really good. It's a huge step forward, as was just mentioned. But I also, I want to give UNR time to work on their conservation easement, but I also want to come back to this board if they haven't got there, because I'm not, I think it's not the best approach to leave this in a divided world as it is. So once this motion takes place, I'm going to come back with one. I hope my colleagues will consider that we revisit the issue of UNR Farm if the conservation easement hasn't moved forward. So just I want to put a marker out there, and I'm voting with that hope and that expectation that you'll support that. So thank you.
Mr. Hartung?
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'm ready to make a motion.
I'm ready for one.
I move that we
Can I-
adopt.
Can I ask one question? Is there any reason why you can't put Ms. Dewar's amendment in there, in your motion?
Can we combine that?
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, are we,
Okay.
if,
We're just going to revisit it within a year,
if,
the tiering?
are we willing to monkey with the tiering there? I mean, because there's other places that the tiering can be monkeyed with
I
also.
didn't say we're monkeying, I said we're going to review it in a year.
Oh, review it in a year.
Yes.
Okay.
Does that make
That's
sense?
So we're
different.
not, so we're not changing, you're not
Not saying
suggesting that we
we're-
change it.
We're not saying change, we're saying we're going to review the tiering in 1 year. I'm just asking if you add that to your motion.
And are you saying?
All tiering or just UNR farms?
Well, we talked about UNR farms.
I mean, I think
But
that
there's
there are,
absolutely no reason we couldn't review all tiering.
I mean, I think that there are other places that the tiering could be reviewed as well. So, Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion that we adopt the 2019 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan with the amendments on page 115 as staff has recommended, with the caveat that we will come back and visit within a year the tiering, not only at UNR Farms, but there are several other places that I would also like to visit.
Okay, that's perfect.
Awesome. Motion by Hartung, is there a second?
Maybe a second.
Second by Ms. Spivey? With comment?
Under discussion?
Yeah, I have I would like to second the motion, and with regards to coming back in a year, and I understand and I agree with the UNR specific request, but my understanding as we've discussed this is that the tiering and the plan itself is fluid and can be looked at throughout, so I don't know if that's already kind of an understood of what this plan that we're accepting today. We have that ability, and I guess I would go to legal to ask, but the UNR farms I am concerned about, and I would like to keep that in there, but can I get a legal opinion on that?
Yes, ma'am, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
You do have the right to look at the plan at any point in time subsequent to it, assuming you adopt it today, the update. As I understand the desire with regard to UNR Farms, you want to put a benchmark on the calendar to make sure that comes back within 1 year. I don't see any harm. It's a board's discretion if they want to add other areas of the tiering, because there was 2 mentioned during your deliberations that may need to be addressed that time. Or if you feel they need to be addressed sooner, that's also possible. So it's up to the board how you wish to proceed.
The motion was within a year.
Okay?
Just for review, yeah, just to.
So we
just
could
to
come
bring it back.
sooner, is
Yes.
what you're saying?
Within a
If
year.
a specific piece, we don't have to wait for a year, but on the other hand, we're not going to look at probably everything, but some highlight
Those 3.
issues.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, Katie, Simon?
Just a clarification. Does that mean that, and I also, even though I'm not a voting member, feel very strongly about the UNR Farms, spent a lot of my career working on flood control. And does that mean that it will come back for a regional plan amendment?
That
Is
was
that
my-
going to be required? If it comes back for review, does it trigger initiating a regional plan amendment in order to change it once this is adopted today?
If I may, Mr.
Yeah.
Chair. What I anticipate is it comes back for review. I don't know what specified action may be necessary or if any. So I think the initial step is review. That could precipitate an amendment. It could require further study. I'm trying to think of the range of options. That would be the board's discretion to determine what action to take at that time.
Mr. Chairman.
That's what I understand the motion is.
Yeah, and so, just real quick, Commissioner Hartung. We would review it, and then we could give a recommendation of which ones do we actually want to direct staff to look into, and then go from there.
Mr. Chair, yes, this body has the ultimate authority to determine when amendments can be initiated. There is a process. If you decide that you want to amend Silver Knolls or whatever community we want to talk about as far as tiering goes, you start that process, then it goes back down to the Planning Commission and starts through the whole thing. You just initiate it, and then it goes through the statutory process.
Awesome. Thank you. Mr. Hartung?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think, I'm not ready to make any changes today because UNR is not at the table.
Right.
And I think, with all due respect to them, we need to have them here to have this conversation as well as to, what their plan is, how the Truckee River Flood Management's plan works backwards, and how we're going to work collaboratively together. So I'm confident that they'll be willing to come to the table and have this conversation.
And to that end, very good point, UNR actually served on the flood project board for many, many years, and we're part of making the decisions on all of those expenditures, that $150 million. So on one hand, the president and the CFO of the university voted time and again to expend public monies to protect our region, and they need to do their part. You know, we monetized one of their properties, we paid them, so it's not like they contributed land, we would have liked that, but they wanted money for the land, we gave it to them, we made that happen. But they're at the table, they have actually have now a Board of Regents directive to get a conservation easement. What I'm concerned about is it dragging on forever and never happening, and then something else comes up, and that's now off the table. So I want to basically say, if you don't have it in a year, at least from this commissioner, I'm going to initiate moving it to Tier 3. So I'm going on record with that, and whatever the board decides as a whole is what they decide as a whole. But I really want them to move forward, and I want to encourage them to do it, and this seems like a good way to get there.
Awesome. Yeah, Ms. Breckus.
Yeah, I want to express my appreciation and congratulations to all, particularly those at the staff level who worked on this. I think I started working on the regional plan about a year after the first revision, the 5-year, and I know what a benchmark it is to the region to get these done. Having said that, I want to bring into light the process. I think early on, as we started this, I had a lot of agitation that there were extracurricular activities going on that were keeping our eyes off of getting the plan done in the timely fashion. Irony, now the plan is out. I've had a copy in my hot hands since August 8th. I hear a lot of, well, it's not perfect, it's the compromises we met to get here, but I think that the front loading of all the conversations, the participation has gotten everyone to a point where they're sick of it, they're sick of meeting, and they're just ready to shove it on the books, and I think that's a failure for the region. I'm not going to support this. I'll tell you, I think that in not identifying a vision among the scenarios, what is going on is we're defaulting to a scenario of the classic, which is sprawl in a growing region, or the satellite isolated communities that are best represented by those plan unit developments that haven't yet gone through the tentative mapping phase, like the Evans Ranch. The surveys, one of them says people wanted emphasis on maintaining infrastructure before adding new. And that's not going on in this scenario. I think it's a big miss in providing the vision of where we want to go as a region, and the negative consequences of this regional forum that we're endorsing today is the trigger to getting us into auto-oriented development that will put us over air quality non-attainment, put additional people into proximity of wildland risk, fire risk, at a time that we are seeing across our state and others incredible tolls, both monetary and human life, in wildland areas. It'll add to congestion on our roads, and it will work against our goal to develop the most affordable, attainable housing, because, which is going to be the infill development, because it's sucking a lot of the resources, sucking a lot of the land to be brought on out to the fringe. So it is a big miss in my mind. I won't be voting for it. So thank you.
Any other? Yeah, Ms. Simon Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to, on behalf of the school district, thank you for allowing us to be part of it. I know that that all of the staffs worked very diligently, and I know that it isn't perfect, but I wanted to, on behalf of the school district, express our deep appreciation and our support for the plan.
Awesome, thank you. I believe we have a motion and a second, so if there's any other comments? None? I'm going to ask for all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Awesome. So I believe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2 opposed. Motion passes. So
I hope you get my vote.
I did, Bonnie. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So I believe we'll move on to.
Mr. Chair, if I may,
Yeah.
could you do a roll call vote so I know who voted?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, can we do a roll call vote? Clerk?
Jenny Breckus,
Nay.
Naomi Dewar,
Aye.
Bonnie Weber,
Aye.
Marsha Burke-Bigler,
Aye.
Charlene Bybee,
Aye.
Donald Abbott,
Aye.
Ed Lawson,
Aye.
Von Hartung,
Aye.
Jean Herman.
Nay.
Motion passes, so we'll move on to 7D. Informational presentation and discussion and possible direction to staff regarding fiscal year 2020-2021 budget. Chair, Ms. Smith, Mr. Smith, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll try to be very brief. We've been sitting here for a while. You guys had asked us previously to get way out in front of the local jurisdiction budget processes in terms of what we think we're going to need moving forward. So I've tried to do the best I can with the transition here, taking over as director to take a look at our existing budget. We're only 3 months into the fiscal year, but we have attempted to look at considerations for fiscal year 2021. So you guys already know this, I think, but funding, how we're funded is outlined in NRS. It's based on Regional Planning Governing Board representation, 40% from the city of Reno that has 4 members, 30% from the city of Sparks, and 30% from Washoe County, both having 3 members. So that's the split on funding coming in. Like many local governments and agencies across the region, and probably across the country, honestly, folks were hit by the recession. And so we've seen a significant drop in revenues coming in for the agency to support the budget since 2005. If you were to adjust $2005 to 2019 value, this is a ballpark because that's, we did it off the internet, but it's about half. Our revenues have dropped to about half in that time period. Likewise, our expenses have also been cut in about half when you compare that expenses in 2005 to what we have today. So we've been trying to save. The good news is that this body has been very good about incrementally updating our budget to allow us to continue to operate. There have been a few 5% increases in the allocations over time. From 15-16 to 16-17, it's not shown here, there was a 5% increase. It was a steady state from 16-17 to 17-18. In 18-19, we saw a 2.5% increase in jurisdictional allocations. And in 19-20, our approved budget now, it was a 5% increase. Also, to support the regional plan and implementation, we have received from each of the jurisdictions a portion commensurate to the board membership of $115,800. And so that has allowed us to get pretty close to where our expenses actually are. But it doesn't get us all the way there. And so we've also participated in some kind of innovative approaches to finding more funds. One of them has been a great program, the Shared Work Program with the Regional Transportation Commission. They've consistently provided us additional funding. We provide them GIS support and support for their long-range planning efforts, particularly the RTP, but also the RIF program, the Regional Road Impact Fee Program. The Western Regional Water Commission has also been very generous over time. They really kicked off the scenario planning back years ago with a large contribution. We ended up giving some of that money back, which was kind of cool too, but we achieved scenario planning and we can do that now. Currently, they pay about $5,000 for our ArcGIS server licensing, and periodically they'll give us money to support studies, or we work for calculating wastewater or water projections for the region, and that informs the regional water management plan. So they've been a great benefactor as well. NDEP, we talked about this before. We haven't done any work for NDEP yet, but we did win a $25,000 award. We anticipate that about half of that, now that we're in this, the plan is adopted, we'll be moving forward. We could start looking at that this fiscal year, and then probably use about $12,500 in the next fiscal year. So some of the assumptions, per the contract that I'm currently under as the interim director, there is a provision that if you guys want to seek someone else to be the director, or at the end of the year, say I apply for the job and don't get it, that I would be made whole back into the GIS coordinator position. Connie Boyd, who's our bookkeeper, we thought it was super important that we acknowledge that liability and looking forward to that budget in case there would be a director and a GIS coordinator position that needed to be filled, and I can show you that. We've also had a big vacation payout for 2 members of staff that have left recently, and so that's a consideration we want to think about in terms of thinking about having enough money in the budget to support that. We're looking to get some additional funds to continue the support for those initiatives in our work plan, namely the Natural Resources Plan, the Public Infrastructure Investment Plan, and the Truckee Meadows Annual Report. We may need to purchase software to provide a dashboard. When we get into the public infrastructure side of things, we may need some help from outside consultants to help us understand how these things work. So we're seeking a little bit there. And also, since the recession, staff has received a handful of cost of living adjustments to salaries, but a merit-based approach to salary increases has not been reinstated for our agency, and so I thought that would be something to bring up for your consideration. And finally, our fund balance, because we haven't been able to bring in the revenues equivalent to our expenses, we've been digging into our fund balance significantly. I think it's down to about 3% right now, on the order of $30,000. It will be at the end of this fiscal year, is the projection. So the big ask today from me, for you to consider in advance of your budget process, is a 5% increase to the jurisdictional allocations. That would equal those amounts there in blue on the right, $15,473 for the city of Reno, in addition to what you give us already, and $11,596 for the city of Sparks and Washoe County, total of additional $38,665. And to continue support in that same distributed fashion at $115,800 to support the PIP, the NR plan, the TMAR, we're calling it Truckee Meadows Annual Report. So that's the big ask right there. Here's where I made another mistake that I will acknowledge in my staff report. The first line of this table in the staff report has 2 sevens, and the commas are all in the wrong spot. So if you saw that and you wondered what is wrong with that guy, this is the actual number. So our estimated revenue based on those assumptions I just laid out for the 2021 fiscal year would be $1 million, $15,714. The payroll expense in the first line there is the consideration if there's a director and a GIS coordinator both filled simultaneously. Payroll would be upwards of, above $750,000. The professional services and services and supplies line items are virtually the same as what we've done historically. There's a little switch of about $5,000 between them based on how those line items worked out, but those numbers haven't gone up. We anticipate that the expenses will yet again exceed even that number only if those 2 positions are filled, leaving us with a negative of 8% at the end of the 2021 fiscal year. The alternative is we don't fill that position. I mean, we don't know what that eventuality might be, but if we didn't, then payroll would come down significantly. And in fact, payroll is down about $25,000 from what we anticipated when we got this year's budget approved. So we're doing a little better than we even thought we were going to. But if we don't fill both positions simultaneously, we'd be looking at starting to build up that fund balance again. So at this point, I would be pleased to hear any sort of direction or recommendations you guys could make, and then hopefully the next step would be for me to go and initiate a conversation with city leadership to try and ensure that we can fund the budget before you guys start doing your budgets. Thank you.
Marcia.
Thank you. I think I would like to see us not fill the positions, just because we really are, okay, we've got our plan in place, now let's see how much we're going to have to work on and all the different things that are going to happen relative to getting the regulations in, and that it may be more work, in which case we may need a different scenario, or it may be less work. So I'd sort of like us to stick where we're at without filling the GIS position, and just move forward with that. And then maybe we might need to review it at mid-year and see, if it's not going to work, because I think with the new plan, a lot of the cities planning people and the county's planning people are going to work more directly with you on putting the plan in place rather than developing the plan now. So I wonder if we shouldn't at least keep this stable for now.
Yeah, if I could just weigh in quickly on that one, Mr. Chair. Yeah, the idea is not for us to fill the GIS coordinator position. We're not seeking to do that. It would just be an eventuality if you guys said, Jeremy, we don't want you to be the director anymore. In the contract, I have the ability to go back to the, well, I appreciate that. Go back to the GIS coordinator position, and then there would need to be a director. So that would just be a liability I wanted you guys to be aware of.
Ms. Breckes?
I didn't spend a lot of time on the implementation of the plan in my comments, but typically a plan with an implementation agenda, kind of bifurcates what that implementation is how much is operational applicability of the plan, usability of the plan, and then how much is the work program to do. And we talked a little bit about the PIP and the natural resource plan, which are huge in my mind. So what I would encourage the board to do was to ask Mr. Smith to go back and bring back at the next meeting the work program, and assign to the work program in the 5-year scenario what needs to get done, and then match that the resources. I do not see in this world how even what I would think the first year activities are to monitor this plan, that can be done without having, say, an executive director, a senior planner or something. I mean, I think you're really short, and that was part of my critique of the plan, is it's punting a lock, the resources aren't there. Plans are only as good as you implement them, monitor them, and have the resources to use them, so.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Spivey? Ms. Spivey?
Yeah, is it on? Yep. Okay. I had a couple questions on the estimated revenue on your budget comparison alternative page. On the estimated revenue, I'm not seeing where you talk about our other sources of revenue that we've always had by doing work and offering services to some of the other entities that pay for that. But I don't see where that estimate of what we, I see what each of the 3 jurisdictions are giving our allocation, but I'm missing where, whether it's water or RTC or whoever's using those services, what we're projecting those revenues to be, because obviously I don't, a negative fund balance is not okay, and maybe we can, through our staffing and maybe waiting on the staffing thing could kind of get us a little bit more breathing room here. But I want to, I don't know where the breakdown is of any income or possible projection of what income we could look at to add to our bottom line.
Absolutely, I appreciate that. See if I can do the math back here. So we're asking for standard allocation with the 5% increase gets down to that total line of $811,974. And then if you were to add below that the $115,800 that we have used previously for the update and we would use for implementation and these other plans that we're trying to seek. I don't have a calculator going. Let's see how quick I can do it. That's about $927,000. So the additional funds we're anticipating $60,000 from the RTC, that's what we've gotten recently. So add $60,000 to that. $10,000 from the WRWC. They have $5,000 for the server. $5,000 was built in because we haven't agreed yet necessarily what exact work we would do to help them. In the past, they've given us more, but we kind of lowballed it a bit there. So that would be $10K. Half of the NDEP funds would be $12,500. And we would get roughly $1,500 from UNR to support a PAC intern. That's a program we've been involved in, and so that's a small amount, but it's in there. And then finally, there's $4,000 built in to get to that revenue number on the $1,015,714. $4,000, we have an interlocal agreement with the Western Regional Water Commission for Christine Birmingham, who's been a contractor for us that does the minutes, to also do their minutes. It never ends up being $4,000 per WRWC contribution. That's kind of the combined cost. But for some reason, the budget lines that I received from the previous administration had that $4,000 in there. So those are the additional pieces that we were factoring into the assumptions.
Okay, and I guess I would just appreciate seeing that in a budget.
You got
I kind
it.
of like seeing the full breakdown and not guessing what those amounts are and how we got to that full number. So if we could have that like itemized breakdown, that would help me.
You got it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to speak to the issue of what happens after. You know, we're all very happy. We adopted a new plan. We're patting ourselves on the back. But what I've seen over, you know, the last 25 years or so is that often the plans are adopted and then people put them on the shelf and they say, we're done, let's declare victory and move on. And to some extent, it's even happened at Reno, I'll say. We adopted a new master plan a year ago. And we really haven't, in my opinion, budgeted to do all the things that we said we were going to do in the plan. So I think it's particularly important here that you do come back with a work program and lay out. I think the next steps are you're going to have to evaluate whether we're all in conformance with this plan. Reno, Sparks, Washoe County, do we meet the plan or not? Do we have to change our plans? You have to evaluate all that. And that's an incredible workload. I mean, equal to, or maybe even in some ways greater to, what you've just been through. Plus, you've kind of set a mark about this infrastructure and the natural resource plan. I think those are really important to move out on. So a plan is only as meaty as what we're doing to implement the plan. And so I don't want us to drop the ball at this point, having adopted this plan, set forth really good policies, and then not have the staffing to go do the plan. So that's just where I sit from all my years of experience in this field. Those plans that succeed are the ones that actually move forward, and those that don't, they're just like, we all pat on ourselves on the back and we totally like move on. Classic scenario, we don't do anything different. So I would really support, and with all due respect, Commissioner Burke-Bigler, I would encourage you to, and especially, we heard today that data help make this plan get better. If you don't continue to support the data effort, and that is primarily GIS, you know, data integrated with maps, if you don't do that, we drop the ball, and you aren't providing the service to us either, you know, as cities and jurisdictions. So, you know, I don't know how you want to take that direction, but that's my feeling. Thanks.
Ms. Burke-Bigler?
Well, I think actually, based on the comments, if we get the information detailed out.
Right.
I might change how I felt about this, but I thought as I was just looking at this, right now, we don't know where this is going. We don't know exactly how much is going to be entailed, and I'd like to see a little more detail on it then.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Approve it.
Mr. Lawson?
So I'm curious, how many budgeted unfilled positions do we have right now?
Currently, we have 25,000 for an admin assistant hasn't been filled. And we have Shawnee Sousa working as a full-time temporary employee without benefits at this time. So we're at 5 people full-time, one is temporary. The other 4 of us are myself, Chris, Nate, and Damien. And then we have a contracted bookkeeper, Connie Boyd. That's about $25,000 a year.
So right now, we just have the GIS position that's unfilled and a part-time.
A regional planner that's unfilled as a full employee.
Lauren's?
Lauren was a senior planner position, but we were seeking to backfill at a regional planner at the.
But technically, your position is open now,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
So that's 3 positions?
That'd be 3, including the halftime admin assistant, correct?
So what's the dollar value on that?
So the 25 for the admin assistant, plus the starting base salary is 49.2 plus benefits, so it's probably closer to 65, right, for the regional planner. And then I think the total benefit package for me was around the 120 mark, with you factor in health insurance and whatnot.
So if I look at our $92,000 shortfall, that can be made up here in the next roughly 6 months, 7 months, correct?
The 92,000 would be if we filled the GIS coordinator and filled the regional.
Right, but we're talking 2 different things here. We're talking
sorry.
about the rest of this fiscal year, which is 7 more months.
Yeah,
We could save roughly $100,000 by not filling those positions, correct?
yeah, we're going to save, yep.
So that makes up our 92,000. If we roll into next year, we have it covered at current funding level. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, Ms. Breckus?
just don't think when you adopted a regional plan, that's the time to be saving, position salary savings, because you're not getting work done on the implementation. And I'm also concerned, as I have been all along, of the fees for services, because those services, that revenue coming in comes with you doing some output, and you're short. So I don't know, I'm kind of ready to roll out of here today, but if you want a motion on this is, come back at when's our meeting, December?
December 12th, I believe, is the
Come
date.
back to the meeting in December with a work program and the resources associated with that, and have conversations in advance with the managers about even this second FY, because we're either going to implement this plan or we're not. So that's a motion.
Second.
Awesome. Motion by Ms. Heckes and a second by Ms. Stewart. Do you have any comments?
Under discussion.
Charton.
So what we're doing now is delaying, is that the suggestion, that we're not going to adopt and we're just going to delay?
Well, this was a preview, just to get it out and start the discussion in advance,
Right. So,
yes.
I mean, I guess I don't see the need for a motion. Did I miss something?
Well, I guess what I was building off of Mr. Lawson's thoughts, which were, let's move into a salary saving mode, and we can make it through the FY. I'm offering another option is, I'm concerned about salary savings because I want to stay with the mission of the organization as of this adoption. So I think a motion is good, and maybe in December, we'll, like Ms. Burke-Bigler had, be able to kind of mull on, where we are, what's the totality of this plan, and say, have it then.
Well, and
Just real quick. So let's back up one slide.
Sure.
So we budgeted $115,000 for regional plan update in 2019, 2020.
Yes.
So what is that money for? The plan's already done.
It
It's
would-
for implementation.
It'd be for implementation, you have the natural resource plan.
So
the
we funded
PIP.
implementation. I'm just bringing this up.
Yeah.
I'm being the devil's advocate here. We're not talking about enough dollars to make a difference to any of us.
Exactly.
But the bottom line is, we do need to be fiscally responsible in this board, and we need that output. And you still are the keeper of information. That, to me, is what this organization is supposed to be. You're the hub where everybody comes to regional planning and to talk to you about what is the plan? How do we keep all that information in-house and people coming to you? And for our growth, it's going to be exponentially more important. We've seen it in past years where developers come and they come talk to you guys. And they say, hey, I have a need for a 4-inch water pipe. Where can I go? And so you guys can help with that. So that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, Ms. Stewart.
Yeah, I think the beauty of Ms. Breckus's proposal is that we get to pick and choose. So we know what we're doing, and we know if we don't want to move forward, what we're not doing. And we just are very thoughtful and conscious of what we're approving. Right now, I'm not sure, because I don't have a detailed work plan, what I would even be approving with this budget. So I want to know what I'm buying for my dollars, or if I don't want to spend my dollars, what I'm leaving on the table and not going to do. So that's why I think it's really important to give a work plan where we can make a thoughtful decision on yes or no.
Thank you.
Ms. Bybee.
So I need to be clear on what our motion actually is. Before I vote on a motion, I kind of need a little bit of clarity. And I guess my question too would be to Norm or to the chair or to Jeremy, is this strictly informational, where we're standing right now and looking, as we're all looking at our next year's budgets for that increase? And I would agree with Mr. Lawson in this proposal, or just information, the continued support for the regional plan update and the natural resource plan and the PIP are all contemplated in us continuing $115,800 to help with some of those costs that we're talking about. But I would agree, I totally agree with Ms. Breckus, Ms. Stewart, on I would would like to see the work plan of, and especially as we're looking at our resources, not just of the funding, but of the manpower to do it, would help me a lot in December to have that information. So I agree with that. I guess I'm not sure if this is anything that needs an actual approval, and I'd like to be clear on a motion if I'm voting on what the motion is. Those are just kind of my thoughts.
It almost, not verbatim, but the thought is still there. Do we even need a motion? I mean, it's coming back already, is it not? Isn't it coming back?
Yeah, but I think it's direction, yeah.
Yeah. I
But
mean,
it's direction that we're giving to staff.
Yeah, but I mean, I think they've collected enough direction
Okay,
by
yes.
our comments of all of us.
That's fine.
They did not-
I'll remove the motion if
and
people
not-
don't want to take it to a vote or clear about it.
I guess I don't understand what we're really voting on. And one thing that I would also remind all of us is there are a number of economists that think we might turn down next year. And we all might be looking at our staffing levels. I mean, it is a distinct possibility. So
Well,
that's, I mean, I think we just let it, it's coming back. Let's look at it at that time, and I'm not suggesting that the economy is turning down, but it is certainly, it's one of those things where let's just let it come back to us. I think you guys have plenty of direction.
I'll definitely compliment your team, Jeremy, and for having this conversation now, instead of, I think last year we had that it was a little bit late.
Exactly.
So definitely,
Yeah.
I'm thrilled that we're having
So
this
true.
now. It might seem a little
Yeah.
early, and we don't know what the future's gonna have, but I think it's better to have this now, definitely. So.
Could I ask a question about the direction, just to verify? In the past, we've,
She withdrew her motion.
I'm sorry. Okay.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. We have a new executive director. I think it's incumbent on us to give him some clarity about what we want in our packets on December. And I can withdraw the motion, but tell me what you think you're going to bring back in the packet in December.
Absolutely. So in December, I would bring a more itemized budget that, number one, indicates what exactly our revenue sources would be. We can get a little more itemized on the expenditures as well. And we're going to have a work plan that is itemized too, so that we know how many resources we think we're going to need to use to do the NR plan, for instance, versus the PIP versus the TMAR, whatever it is.
Okay.
Did that get close?
I hope so. I mean, I'm even concerned about this FY and
Sure.
adding planning staff in. And, I know this is a conversation about next FY, but I'd hate to see us lose 6 months and just be on a salary savings mode, which I've been on those fiscal years. Not much gets done.
Yeah. So is it possible, excuse me, Mr. Chair, is it possible to, bring both? So we see, what does the rest of this year look like?
Yes, it
What
is.
can you accomplish with the resources you have? Or what's staying on the, what's going to be on the cutting room floor and not going to get done in the next 6 months? Because I know in the next 6 months, you have to do conformance review. And that's heavy duty.
Yep.
I mean, you got to look at all 3 jurisdictions' plans and say whether we conform or not, and if we don't, how we don't, and that kind of stuff. So I'd love to see both, too.
Okay, you got it. Can I ask one clarifying question? Previously, as I've seen it, this agency or this board adopts a budget in April or June. Are you looking for me to bring a budget for adoption in December, or just another kind of more itemized, detailed preview with this fiscal year's completion and next?
That's a good point, because we meet quarterly, right? And so what quarter?
Well, every 2 months, right?
Every 2 months.
Okay, so there's time then for him to bring it.
February could be.
And you're bringing, in December, you're bringing the schedule of meetings for the 20-year.
Absolutely.
Why don't you, on that schedule, identify the budgetary cycle for the agency for the FY?
You got it.
Sounds good. Mr. Lawson.
Jeremy, just so you know, last year when we got the budget from this, we had already approved our budget for the
That's
state.
exactly right.
So April or June is not a good time.
Okay.
The date needs to be February, probably at the latest.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
And that's that way it gets rolled into our budgets. In April, or what did we get it, May? It was pretty dang late, but we had already sent our budget into the state.
Thanks.
I think even prior maybe to the December meeting, if you want to sit down with the city manager and the county manager and just have that, keep them involved with this whole process.
You got it.
As well.
Okay.
Are you good, Jenny?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, moving on then, we'll close 7D, hop over to 8A. Do we have a director's report?
Thank you. Just that our next regularly scheduled meeting will be on December 12th, 2019. I believe it's here in this chamber. And we will be bringing what we just talked about, as well as the advanced schedule for the year 2020.
Awesome.
And also, thank you very much.
Yes, sir, and AB, legal report?
Mr. Chairman, I have nothing further.
Perfect. 8C, the Washoe County School District Board of Trustees.
We'll pass just to thank you all for all the support you've given us for the groundbreakings. A lot of you have been out for those and touring the new schools, so thank you for that. We appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you. And then request for future agenda items by anyone?
Maybe this is the time, just real quick, I just wanted to mentioning schools. We're still planning to have our school subcommittee, whatever we want to call it, so that we can in fact talk about projects of regional significance and how they affect schools or other issues. And it's just been tough, getting schedules together, but Jeremy, we wanted to wait till this was done,
Yep.
and then you're going to get that scheduled.
Absolutely.
So it's not specifically an extra agenda item, but it's just an update on where we are with that, so.
Thank you. Anything else? Good to go. Public comment? Any public comment?
There's none?
Perfect. No written correspondence either?
We have none.
None? Perfect. And motion for adjournment? Second?
Second.
All right. Meeting's adjourned.